Hey guys, Mr. Steckler here. So I want to show you guys a little tutorial on word art, text borders, and text effects. Let's get into it. So word art is under the Insert tab, and if you click on word art, there's a bunch of different pre-formatted versions of letters you can choose between. So if I clicked on this over here, it would allow me to type whatever word that I wanted, and then I can go over to the Home tab, and I'd be able to change the size of the font to whatever size that I want. I could change it to a completely different backgrounds, and voila, you can make these beautiful letters without too much effort at all, and you can put them in for your presentation. Now, if you want to be able to customize this word art more, something to be just aware of is that there are only a certain number of word art styles. There's about over here 20 in total. So if you don't want to have something that's pre-formatted, then you are going to have to try and do it yourself, which is where text borders and text effects come in. I'm going to show you guys how to do that now. So if I were to open up a completely blank slide, and I were to type the word proximity over here, what I'm going to show you guys how to do is I'm going to show you guys how to format this on your own. So first is I just want to make this big enough so that when I do put in those text effects, you can see them. So in order to put these text effects in, and the text borders, you're going to highlight the word that you're looking for, and you can either go to shape format or you can right click and you can go to format text effects. It'll pop up on the right hand side over here, and there's a bunch of different options. There are, and I'll show it to you over here as well, there is a outline color, there is soft edges, rotation, glow, reflection, shadow, all sorts of good stuff. So what I'm going to do to start is I'm going to give it a shadow, and there are a lot of different types of shadows, inner, outer, pervasive ones there at the bottom. The one that I really like is I really like to give it an outer shadow, which is kind of like a blurred version of the letter off to the backgrounds, which really kind of makes it have this 3D effect over here. And there's a lot of customization that you can do with this effect where you can pick the shadow you want, but if you go into the options, you can like play with how transparent it is, the size of the letter. You know, if you get too far away, it's not necessarily going to do what it's trying to do, but maybe you're trying to go for some sort of effect where you kind of see that that duplication of size. You can also go over and go ahead and blur that to make it, you know, go from really clear and crisp, which might be what you're going for, or something that's kind of like just making it have a 3D effect over here. You can also change the angle, make it go above, below, reduce the blur and make that more obvious where it's going all the way around the letter. So you can kind of play with what looks best to you. And there isn't necessarily like a best way to use shadow, but that's what design is. There's not a best way. You can play with the distance, a lot of stuff you can go play with over here in terms of the effects. Now this only can be done on the desktop version of PowerPoint, and it will not allow you to do it on an iPad. You can, however, like I said, for the word art, use the word art and the pre-configured ones in your iPad, which is kind of cool. So that is shadow over here. Another couple of really good effects that I think that are worth using. You can use glow. I don't like to use glow very often for a title slide. You know, some people like it. I don't like it too much, but what I will do is if I have a big paragraph over here and I have a lot of different words, and I'm just going to type random gibberish right now, and if I wanted like one of these to stand out, like one little part over here, maybe I, you know, highlight this part. I think that the glow over here is a nice tool to make just a little part of that stand out. And it's not so much where a lot of people are like taught growing up to use a highlighter tool. Like if you were to highlight this, this doesn't look clean. This doesn't, it's like, it's too dramatic. It's drawing too much attention to it. Highlighters generally are never, ever used in any presentation. I challenge you to go to any company's website and look for how they use the highlighter tool. I'm not telling you that it's not used, but I'm telling you that it's rarely used and it's for good purpose. So glow gives something just enough of a pop to make it stand out. So there's also over here a couple of other effects that I want to go into. A really good one is a 3D rotation if you want to try and play with shapes. So you can kind of change the way in which a word looks over here. This is done on a lot of YouTube videos, and you can even make it kind of blend with a particular shape, where if you were using like a rectangle over here, and then you were to rotate the rectangle, and you were to send this to back, you could play around with the idea of this shape over here being slanted, and then use that to showcase something. maybe your whole title slide has something like this. And I don't know the best way, as I mentioned before, but there's a lot of cool things you can do with these text effects. I'm going to go back over here. So before I did that change. And also in shape format over here, one that's real good to think about is bevel over here. It's a little hard to use with black, but if I change the color over here to maybe a gray, let's see if we can get this to stand out. It's kind of like a slate gray looking thing. So if I go over to the bevel, it's going to make that stand out a little bit, how you can kind of see that definition. And I think that using a bevel in combination with a shadow is a very clean look. I'm going to get rid of that glow effect over there so you don't get distracted by that. So it's really a clean look. And sometimes instead of doing just those two, you can even make it a little bit more with adding a border. In this case, I don't need a border. I think it stands out really well against that white. But let's say I had a picture over here and that picture was red. And I wanted to kind of show a little bit of repetition. Maybe I decided to do a red border around this. And you can kind of see that while that red border was like overwhelming with no effects, because I've beveled it and made it 3D, it's just this subtle hint of red in the backgrounds, where if I were to use that red border on a plain word, so let me type this one more time, proximity, without actually having all of these text effects. So new slide, proximity, and if I were to take this over here and I were to do that border, you're going to notice that this border does not look good. Let's just make that a little bigger so that you guys can see. It's definitely not going to look good on thin letters. It's kind of doesn't really do too much over here. But if I make this thicker and I go over to Rockwell extra bolds, you're going to notice that in this case, actually no, I take it back. I think it looks decent. I think that it's not necessary. It does give it a little pop, but I think it does definitely look a little bit better on that 3D version. So play around with text borders. I'm not telling you the best way to use them, but that's how you would use them. And it's also a powerful tool that if I were to change the background over here and I was to format this to be, let's say, let's do let's do a nice red background over here. So if I wanted to make something stand out that didn't stand out, so let's make this a horrible color. Let's do some sort of color like a it's okay. Let's maybe do what's close to red that doesn't look so good. Let's do you know what? Let's just do red on red. So obviously red on red, you can't see anything. But if you were to add in that text border, you can very simply and cleanly make something stand out that wasn't there, and then you can play around with more text effects to really make that word pop. So keep in mind the rule, dark on light, light on dark, same thing with these borders. Next, we are going to go over a couple of the final text effects that I was going over last time. So if we go over to our, let's go to this one over here, and let's turn this back into a black background over here. So if we were to play around with this text over here and we were to go back to these effects, the last ones I want to go over were transformations, which you can kind of play around with if you wanted to use different shapes over here, where again, I mentioned how you can do the shape for the other one. So you can play around with that, and you can also play around with maybe a reflection. I don't like reflection too often, but sometimes it adds a little bit to it. But there's a lot of text effects. You know, if you're still watching this video, then it's time for you to go play around with these effects. Because at this point, that's basically what I'm doing. I'm just showing what is there. You can play around with the weight of different borders, make the border a lot bigger, a lot smaller. I think that, you know, sometimes that makes a big difference. And if you also look at some of the YouTube videos, they often have really large borders around these words to really make them pop. So go play. Hopefully you learned something. And in the next video, I'm going to go over gradients.